So, it's New Year's Eve. Well, it's been a fun little year, I must admit. Quite a lot of things happened during this time. So, just as everybody does, I'm going to show you my whole clock collection. This time I'm going to get into detail on each clock, and I'm only going to chime those that don't need the hands to be turned to be demonstrated. So, as usual, I'm going to start with this one. This is a Gustav Becker box clock made in Germany, produced between 1907 and 1911. That's the production date. I determined this by looking at the logo stamped on the back of the movement, and because it has count-wheel striking. It runs 8 days on a winding and strikes on a coiled gong. The case and dial still need some attention, but overall it's a nice clock. Moving down here, this is a 1976 Yantar box clock. It's a mini box clock, it's a little smaller. It has a really nice design, I like the color and the octagonal shaped dial. It runs for 8 days on a winding and has bim bam striking on 3 chime rods. I'm going to activate it. So yeah, this clock was made for expert because instead of Cyrillic letters it has Latin letters on it. This is my second Yantar box clock. It's actually the first box clock that I ever got. It has a different style from this one, as you might see, and it was made a bit later. This one has Cyrillic letters on it. And here it should have an identical piece to this one right here, but that broke. It's somewhere up there. It runs for 8 days on a winding and it strikes on 3 chime rods with bim bam. Down here is my Junghans loudspeaker wall clock, runs for 8 days. It was made probably in the 1960s or 1970s. Here is the speaker that gives its name, you might see it in there. And I'm going to activate it with a silencer that's located right here. Although it has a speaker, the sound is not that loud, which is kind of unfortunate, but it's still a nice piece. This is a Junghans long case clock that was made in October of 1928. It runs for 8 days, keeps really good time. Unfortunately, the case is missing. That top part is the only remain from it. Inside in there is a label that says that this clock was bought from a shop in Nuremberg by Herr Fenrer. That means Sir Fenrer. I'm not really that good at pronouncing those German words, although I'm studying German, so I'm trying my best. And it strikes on 5 chime rods with bim bam. It's not that loud because it doesn't have that resonance that it used to have in the case. That's kind of unfortunate, but it's decent enough. So yeah, it's a really nice one. I also forgot to mention that I fixed the beat issue. So now it doesn't knock itself out of beat anymore. And here's one of my favorites. This is a mini Vienna style wall clock made by Junghans. The production date remains a mystery to this day, because the trademark that is visible on the dial was introduced in the 1890s, but the movement looks to be made in the 1870s. So I would say that this was made in the early 1890s. You can view the movement through those glass side panels. It runs for 8 days, has 2 open mainsprings. It's in good shape and it strikes on a coiled gong. Also, the dial is made from a paper material. I don't really know what that is. It looks like old paper or cardboard. There is a Korean wall clock that runs for 31 days. It has one of those mass-produced Korean movements. It's not bad quality, it's actually a really good quality clock. It was made by Rollens in the 1970s and it strikes on a coiled gong. It's the loudest clock that I own. I also replaced the winding key. It used to have a 19th century winding key, and I replaced it with a Yantar wall clock key because I didn't have proper grip on that old key, so I couldn't really wind it properly. Here are 3 cuckoo clocks that run for 24 hours. This one was made by Hubert Heer in Germany. This one was made in Germany, I don't know who made it. And this one was made by Victoria Arad in Romania. This one is from the 1990s, this one's from the 1950s probably, and this one's from the 1970s. It was too close to the hour. I don't know if I can demonstrate this one with one hand. I'm going to try. Hold on. Yeah. Oops. That globe fell. And I'm going to try one more time. Down here is this Odo wall clock that was made probably in the 1950s or 1940s. I really like the color of it. As you might see, it has a figurine right there that strikes the bell, and it has a sound of a chime rod because, as you might see, there's a chime rod in the back of the clock. This one runs for 8 days on a winding. And up here is a kitchen clock that was made probably in the 1950s. The movement is dismantled because the mainspring broke, and I still need to fix it. This is a Hermle wall clock with a quartz movement, and it strikes on a bell every hour. It strikes only once, or I should say it has a passing strike. Here are some alarm clocks and spare parts. There's the Junghans Echo desk clock and a Mayak crystal desk clock. Both of these clocks were made in the 1960s and they run for 8 days. This is a Hermle wag-on-the-wall clock with a cast iron front, made in the 1970s. Actually, it was made in 1974. It runs for 8 days and it strikes on a bell. There aren't any free nails on the wall, so it stays down here. Also, here is a Mayak cuckoo clock. It was made in the 1960s. It has one of these older movements. It doesn't have that steel-plated movement. It has one with brass plates and count wheel striking. It stays down here because of the same reason. And I can't demonstrate it right now. Sorry. My English is not that good, so don't judge me. Here is a Black Forest wag-on-the-wall clock with a painted dial. It looks really nice. It was made in the 1870s or 1880s. It has a wooden framed movement and it strikes on a bell. It's really nice. It's also one of my favorites. This is an Ansonia mantle clock made in America. It's my first striking American clock. I don't really know how to date this thing. It has a really unusual shape and it runs for 8 days. I'm going to demonstrate it to you. It strikes on a coiled gong, which is also really unusual. Actually, I'll do it once more. Oops. And here's another favorite clock of mine. This is the Junghans mantle clock with the leather covered case. It's been suggested to me that this material is actually called vinyl, so it's not actual leather, but it has this sort of leather texture even when you touch it. So yeah, I was a little wrong in there. You can see it has a loudspeaker sort of assembly. It runs for 8 days. It was made in the 1960s and it's overall a really nice one. It used to be where the Hermle wag-on-the-wall clock is now, sorry. But I moved it in here because you couldn't hear the striking properly. Okay, this should be the right time. Here's a bunch of Chinese clocks, and in here are some other alarm clocks. I won't go into detail on each of them. So here are alarm clocks from Russia, Germany, Romania, and Czechoslovakia. There's one right there, the last one, and China, that are over there. You just saw them. So yeah, and also here is the Ansonia carriage clock. I still didn't manage to fix the minute hand, so it's not running right now. And also here is the Victoria Arad pendulum clock. It's a wall clock, as you know. Again, I don't have any free nails on the wall, so it stays right here. And there are my mental clocks, most of them. This is a Hermle mental clock made in the 1960s. Runs for 8 days on a winding. Strikes on 3 chime rods with Bim Bam. This is a Kininger mental clock, also made in the 1960s. It has a platform lever escapement and it runs super fast. It also runs for 8 days on a winding and it strikes on 3 chime rods with Bim Bam. This is the Perfecta or Perjecta, I think it's actually Perfecta. Mini mental clock, runs for 8 days. It's really cute and it has a single train movement. And there is another favorite clock of mine. Yes, I have many favorite clocks in my collection. This one was made by Dujena in Germany in the 1960s. Actually, I think it's 1964, if I remember correctly. It has a modern designed case and I really like it. Inside it uses a Hermle. I have to stop pronouncing it like that. I need to pronounce it the German way. Hermle. 340-020, I think, or something like that, or 320. Well, I don't really remember. It's a really small movement and it has a very high-pitched Bim Bam on 3 chime rods. Yeah, I was holding it like that because it made some kind of whirring noise while it was striking. And it also runs for 8 days on winding. And also here is that horribly made German mental clock. I don't know why I'm keeping it, sorry. It's gathering dust in there. It also doesn't want to chime or strike. Come on. Yeah, you know what? Forget it. Now we're in my room, and this is most likely the centerpiece of my collection. It's a Junghans box clock that plays the Westminster chimes. That was it chiming, and I won't give you any more information about it until I'll make a video about it. This is a Gerhard Mantel clock made in 1944. It has a tiny piece of brass right there that says that this clock was offered as a token of appreciation to Mr. T. Little from Henley Traffic Depot in May 1944. It runs for 8 days on a winding, same for that one. And it has the original engraved key and pendulum bob. And in that envelope there are the original instructions for setting this clock up from 1944 and a receipt from the jewelry store that sold this clock in the 1970s. Down here is my Hermle Westminster chiming mantel clock. It's my largest mantel clock. It was made probably in the 1960s, runs for 8 days on a winding. It's not running right now, it stopped yesterday for some reason, it might need a clean. It only runs for about 3 days, so I might as well oil it. and here's how it sounds like. Moving down here is an HAC mantle clock with an Art Deco design. It was made in the 1940s. It has a Junghans movement inside, although it has the HAC logo on it. And it runs for 8 days on a winding, has bim bam striking on 3 chime rods. It's really unusual in having this curved front, and I really like the chrome numerals and hands. This is not the original key, this is a key that came most likely from an Asian clock. This is my Vedette transistor Atomat well clock, made in the late 1960s or early 1970s in France. It uses a Japanese movement, and it strikes on 2 chime rods with bim bam. It's also one of my favorites. Here's my Junghans bracket clock, or tall-shaped clock, that was made in 1905. It uses a B05 movement, runs for 30 hours on a winding, has 2 open mainsprings, and it strikes on a coiled gong. And just like my Vienna style Junghans, it uses a paper dial. This is a small carriage clock with alarm, made in France in the 1870s. It has a porcelain dial and a pendulum instead of a balance wheel. A really short pendulum. And it runs for 2 days on a winding. And finally, here's my latest acquisition. You haven't seen this one before. It's a Russian calendar clock with an Atomat style movement. It's not working right now. I need to replace the balance wheel because one of the coils that lifts the escape wheel broke. So I think I'm going to get it fixed next year. And also, I forgot about this one. This is a Seiko wall clock with melodies in motion. It's the collector's edition from 2006. And I got it a few years ago, I can't really remember. I didn't do a video about this one, I have to do that. So yeah, I think the only one that's left is that long case clock from downstairs. And last but not least is this Chinese grandfather clock made in the early 2000s by Jiafu. It runs for 31 days and it has open mainsprings. It also shows the humidity and temperature. It strikes on a pair of chime rods, on the hour and on the half hour. Alright, so those were all of my clocks. This video came out way worse than I expected, but it's still fine. So yeah, that's about it. Happy New Year everyone, and see ya next time.